Hello again, my dear students. Welcome to this new topic about the cardiovascular system. For this part of my lecture, I will specifically talk about the heart, which is the muscular pump inside our body. Later in my second lecture, I will also talk about the other major composition of the cardiovascular system that serve as the plumbing inside our body, which are the blood vessels. So first, I will talk about the anatomy of the heart. So the objective of this part of my lecture is to describe the location of the heart inside the body and to identify the major anatomical areas of this life-giving pump. As you are listening right now, try clenching your fist. Look at it closely. So the size of your heart is approximately the size of your fist. The heart is a hollow organ shaped like a cone, which is contrary to what we traditionally know as to how the heart is shaped. Additionally, the regular heart weighs less than a pound. The modest size and weight of the heart gives us an idea of its incredible strength and function. Moving on, the heart is enclosed within the middle portion of the thoracic cavity called the mediastinum. Also, it is located in between the left and the right lungs. Its pointed apex is directed toward the left hip and rests on the diaphragm approximately at the level of the fifth intercostal space. This is exactly where one would place a stethoscope to count the heart rate for an apical pulse. Its broad posterior superior aspect or base, from which the great vessels of the body emerge, points toward the right shoulder and lies beneath the second rib. This figure shows where in the body the heart is specifically located. So beneath the median section of the thoracic cavity, we can find the heart flanked on each side of the lungs. Please take note of the direction of the apex. So the apex is directed towards the left hip and rests on the diaphragm. This slide shows the location of the heart within the thorax. It is clear from the left picture where the heart is located in relation to the sternum and the ribs. So the picture on the right shows the cross-sectional view showing the relative position of the heart in the thorax. Now let me discuss about the membrane enclosing the heart. So the pericardium is the sac that covers or encloses the heart. The pericardium is composed of three layers: a single layer of fibrous pericardium and a double layer of serous pericardium. The fibrous pericardium is the loosely fitting superficial part of the sac and protects and anchors the heart. Lubricating serous fluid is produced by the serous pericardial membranes and collects in the pericardial cavity between these serous layers. This fluid allows the heart to beat easily in a relatively frictionless environment as the serous pericardial layers slide smoothly across each other. I mentioned previously that there are two layers of the serous pericardium. These layers are the parietal pericardium and visceral pericardium or epicardium. The parietal pericardium lines the interior of the fibrous pericardium. At the superior aspect of the heart, this parietal layer attaches to the large arteries leaving the heart. The visceral pericardium, or also called epicardium, is part of the heart wall. In other words, the epicardium is the innermost layer of the pericardium and the outermost layer of the heart wall. So for the walls of the heart, these are composed of three layers. The outermost layer is the epicardium or the visceral pericardium, which I just recently talked about in the previous slide. The myocardium is the next layer, which consists of thick bundles of cardiac muscle. The myocardium is the contracting layer of the heart. Next to the myocardium is the endocardium, which is made up of a thin, glistening sheet of endothelium that line the chambers of the heart. The endocardium is continuous with the linings of the blood vessels, leaving and entering the heart. This slide contains the illustration of the coverings and walls of the heart. You can see the pericardium or the sac enclosing the heart and its layers, a monolayer of loosely fitting fibrous pericardium, and two layers of serous pericardium composed of the parietal layer and the visceral layer. The different layers of the heart wall is also evident. First is the epicardium, which is actually the same structure as the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. Second, the contracting myocardium. And lastly, the innermost layer of the heart wall, the endocardium. Now we move on to the chambers of the heart as well as its associated great vessels. After this specific part of our topic, you are expected to trace the pathway of blood through the heart and to compare and note the importance of both the pulmonary and systemic circulations. Before we talk about how blood flows within the heart, let us first consider these general rules. First, as a general rule, arteries carry blood away from the heart, while veins carry blood toward the heart. Second, the right side of the heart is the pulmonary circuit, while the left side is the systemic circuit. You will know the difference of these in the succeeding slides. So the heart is divided into four chambers. Two of these chambers are the receiving chambers known as the atria, and the other two chambers are the ventricles, which are the blood discharging chambers. The heart is divided longitudinally by a septum, referred to as the interatrial septum, where it divides the atria. Meanwhile, the interventricular septum divides the ventricles. This image shows the different parts of the heart, specifically its chambers. Located superiorly are the left and right atria. The two atria do not have a direct role in the pumping activity of the heart. Instead, they assist with filling the ventricles. Blood flows into the atria under low pressure from the veins of the body and then continues on to fill the ventricles. The inferior thick walled ventricles are the discharging chambers, or actual pumps of the heart. When they contract, blood is propelled out of the heart and into the circulation. Now, let me talk about the pulmonary circulation. So, the right side of the heart works as the pulmonary circuit pump. Its main function is to carry blood to the lungs for gas exchange and back to the heart. The pulmonary circulation starts from the right ventricle to the lungs and back to the left atrium of the heart, which is the receiving chamber. Meanwhile, the systemic circulation functions to supply oxygen and nutrient rich blood to all body organs. This starts from the left ventricle through the body tissues and back to the right atrium. These are the associated blood vessels of the pulmonary and systemic circulations. The inferior and superior vena cava receive oxygen poor blood from the different parts of the body into the heart. The pulmonary arteries carry oxygen poor blood from the heart to the lungs. After gas exchange, oxygen rich blood is carried by the pulmonary veins from the lungs to the heart. Lastly, the aorta receives the oxygen-rich blood from the pulmonary veins. This slide shows the summary of both the pulmonary and systemic circuits. The heart receives oxygen-poor blood from the veins of the body through the large superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, and pumps it out through the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk splits into the right and left pulmonary arteries, which carry blood to the lungs, where oxygen is picked up and carbon dioxide is unloaded. Oxygen rich blood drains from the lungs and is returned to the left side of the heart through the four pulmonary veins. Oxygen rich blood returned to the left atrium, flows into the left ventricle, and is pumped out into the aorta, from which the systemic arteries branch to supply essentially all body tissues. After oxygen is delivered to tissues, oxygen poor blood circulates from the tissues back to the right atrium via the systemic veins, which finally empty their cargo into either the superior or inferior vena cava. Let us now move on to the different valves in the heart, which allow blood to flow in a unidirectional manner through the heart chambers. The first set of valves are the atrioventricular valves. The atrioventricular valves, or AV valves, are located between the atria and the ventricles on each side. These valves prevent backflow into the atria when the ventricles contract. The AV valves are open during heart relaxation and closed when the ventricles are contracting. There are two types of atrioventricular or AV valves. The left AV valve, or the bicuspid valve, or also called the mitral valve, consists of two flaps or cusps of endocardium. The right AV valve, or the tricuspid valve, has three cusps anchored by the chordae tendineae. The second set of valves, the semilunar valves, guards the bases of the two large arteries leaving the ventricular chambers. Thus, they are known as the pulmonary semilunar valve and aortic semilunar valve. The semilunar valves are closed during heart relaxation and are forced open when the ventricles contract. The valves force blood to continually move forward through the heart by opening and closing in response to the pressure changes in the heart. For the homeostatic imbalance relating to heart valves, we have valvular stenosis. In valvular stenosis, the valve cusps become stiff, often because of repeated bacterial infection of the endocardium. This forces the heart to contract more vigorously than normal to create enough pressure to drive blood through the narrowed valve. In each case, the heart's workload increases and ultimately the heart weakens and may fail. Under such conditions, the faulty valve is replaced with a synthetic valve, a cryopreserved human valve, or a chemically treated valve taken from a pig heart. So now let us move on to the next subtopic, which is the physiology of the heart. Aside from your crush, what really makes the heart beat? So within our hearts, there is a conduction system that sets the basic rhythm of the heart. This is called the intrinsic conduction or nodal system. The intrinsic conduction system is composed of a special tissue found nowhere else in the body. It is much like a cross between a muscle and nervous tissue. This system causes heart muscle depolarization in only one direction, so from the atria to the ventricles. In addition, the intrinsic conduction system enforces a contraction rate of approximately 75 beats per minute of the heart. The intrinsic conduction system is composed of several parts. First is the sinoatrial or SA node. Located on the right atrium, this crescent-shaped node is the heart's pacemaker. The atrioventricular or AV node is also a part of the nodal system which is found at the junction of the atria and ventricles. At the AV node, the impulse is delayed briefly to give the atria time to finish contracting. The other components include the atrioventricular or AV node at the junction of the atria and ventricles, the atrioventricular bundle or bundle of His at the right and left bundle branches located in the interventricular septum, and finally, the Purkinje fibers which spread within the myocardium of the ventricle walls. This image shows the different components of the intrinsic conduction or the nodal system. We can see the SA node located in the right atrium, which sets the pace of the heart. Located at the junction of the right atrium and the ventricle is the AV node. The other components, including the AV bundle or bundle of His, the bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers, are also seen. Now, let me talk about the different pathologic conditions that interfere with the regular conduction of impulses across the heart. The first is heart block, which is a condition caused by a damage to the AV node. When this occurs, the ventricles begin to beat at their own rate, which is much slower some or all of the time. Ischemia is a condition characterized by the lack of adequate blood supply to the heart muscle. Ischemia may lead to fibrillation, which is a rapid, uncontrolled quivering of the ventricles. Next is tachycardia, which is a condition where there is rapid heart rate, more than 100 beats per minute. Opposite to tachycardia is bradycardia, where there is slower than normal heartbeats per minute, less than 60 beats per minute. So now let me talk about cardiac cycle and heart sounds. In a healthy heart, the atria contract simultaneously. Then, as they start to relax, the ventricles begin to contract. Systole and diastole mean heart contraction and relaxation, respectively. The term cardiac cycle refers to the events of one complete heartbeat during which both atria and ventricles contract and then relax. The average heart beats approximately 75 times per minute, so the length of the cardiac cycle is normally about zero point 0.8 seconds. The cardiac cycle has five important events. These are atrial diastole or ventricular filling, atrial systole, isovolumetric contraction, ventricular systole or ejection phase, and lastly, isovolumetric relaxation. This slide shows the summary of events occurring during the cardiac cycle. Take note that the small black arrows indicate the regions of the heart that are contracting. The thick red and blue arrows indicate direction of blood flow. During isovolumetric phases in periods 3 and 5, the ventricles are closed chambers and the volume of blood they contain is unchanging. So, the last concept that I will talk about is cardiac output. Cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped out by each side of the heart in 1 minute. It is the product of the heart rate and the stroke volume. The stroke volume is the volume of blood pumped out by a ventricle with each heartbeat. In general, stroke volume increases as the force of ventricular contraction increases. These are the different homeostatic imbalance conditions relating to cardiac output. The pumping action of the healthy heart maintains a balance between cardiac output and venous return. But when the pumping efficiency of the heart is reduced so that circulation is inadequate to meet tissue needs, congestive heart failure occurs. Congestive heart failure is usually a progressive condition that reflects weakening of the heart. Pulmonary congestion happens when the left part of the heart fails. This happens when the right side of the heart continues to propel blood to the lungs, but the left side is unable to eject the returning blood into the systemic circulation. Pulmonary congestion causes pulmonary edema. Lastly, is peripheral congestion. This time, this occurs when the right side of the heart fails. This is associated with edema in the distal parts of the body. This concludes my discussion about the heart. For more information, please read the reference material we use for our class. See you again in my lecture about the blood vessels.